We are going off to stablecoin land to talk about Tether, who says it will buy Bitcoin for stablecoin reserves using realized profits. And QN, the company that issues the USDT stablecoin, reported $1.48 billion of net profits and revealed $1.5 billion in Bitcoin holdings. David, I'm going to toss this one off to you. Tether really made a comeback there and now diversifying their reserves. What do you make of this?
Yeah, you could sense my unease over the airwaves. I don't love this. And I mean, I guess in the larger context, it's not that big of a deal because Tether does have a lot of dollar-denominated assets, a lot of other financial assets in the mainstream finance system. But the reason this is not necessarily great in principle is because it amounts to compounding risk, right? Like Tether is such an infrastructural element of the entire crypto market that if anything bad happens to Tether, that will actually tank the price of Bitcoin. That means that if Tether's backing is partly made up of Bitcoin, then any problem with Tether will be self-reinforcing. I'm going to get roasted for even making this comparison, but it makes Tether look a little bit more like Terra, which, if you remember, was the stablecoin that blew up in what was called a death spiral back in May, almost exactly a year ago. That was because Terra used its own assets to back what it called a stablecoin. Now, Tether is using an asset to back a stablecoin that's tightly tied to its own stability and value, which, you know, it's not a huge portion at this point, but it's a potentially structurally, it's not great. Zach, I see you nodding along. You want to chime in?
Yeah, wasn't this like circularity always the concern, like legit no shade here, always the concern of like the Tether truther squad, right? Like the fact that like this would be the thing that was backing up the most systemically important stablecoin, to your point, seems like a bad sort of like loop and could be a bad feedback loop should it become a significant portion of its backing. Tether, I think, has been pretty resilient. They've been shifting, again, toward less risky assets, you know, dollars and T-bills, stuff like that, which, again, I mean, there's risk associated with that in the present environment, but maybe not a ton. So this to me sort of feels like an announcement of a thing that people long suspected was already happening behind the scenes. But I am not super plugged into the daily Tether discourse. So I'd have to throw that back to you as to whether or not that was always the longstanding concern.
Yeah, I mean, it's really more, I would characterize it more as definitely, like a suspicion that Tether was engaging with Bitcoin price in some way or another. But fundamentally, in principle, like the same concern definitely is at play here, that, you know, there's cross risk, there's mingling risk here at a structural level. Again, it's not substantial enough as a share of Tether's backing that it should be concerning in the implementation that we're seeing right here. But as a long-term thing, I mean, you don't want to see a scenario, for example, where Tether winds up like 50% backed by Bitcoin or something like that. That would be really bad. So as maybe a portion of the package, that's one thing, but like as it grows, it's not good. Jen, what are your thoughts here?
Well, I was going to ask you a question. I think you've partially answered it. So the story also says that 85% of the reserves are held in cash and cash equivalents. And I was going to see, like, does that change your outlook on this? I'm just a small brain when it comes to treasury management.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main point is just, are you dealing with exogenous or endogenous risk, right? There is risk to holding treasuries. There is risk to, you know, for a while, it was pretty clear that Tether was backed by a lot of Chinese commercial paper, which was really not good. But because it was inherently risky in itself, it's different if you're plugging risk that you already face as a sector back into your own risk profile as a backing asset. So I think that, yeah, the external nature of the risk in their other assets is crucial. You have to have, you know, different balances in terms of where your exposure lies. So the proportion definitely matters. I mean, even if they're 15% Bitcoin, I gotta say that doesn't sound great, but I'm not sure if that's what the 85% number indicates overall.
Yeah, there's a lot of Tethers out there in the world, something like 82 billion in circulation. So this is by far the leading stablecoin used in the market. And, you know, I think to their credit, they've been trying to assuage some of the concerns about the lack of transparency that has historically plagued their operations. So they're getting out and providing, you know, snapshots of their holdings, attestations in some respects. So I think like the fact that they're doing this is good. They're obviously thinking through it. They're like, okay, well, this is from profits. We're just like, this is not going to be from our operating, blah, 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 blah. But I think like, again, I think the compounding risk is probably the best way. Really. The best way to say it, but to their credit, they're thinking through it and trying to be as transparent as possible with some of these numbers. So that's good.
Yeah. I have another question about this, though, which is interesting, which is why are they doing this right now when cash equivalents offer much better returns potentially? As we know, interest rates are really high right now. So those treasury bills that they're sitting on are generating like 5 or 6% or something like that. Bitcoin does not have a dividend. So like that's a question, too, from a like operating profits perspective. Like, why would you do this rather than take that same money and put it into something that's generating a consistent 5% return? Maybe it's their, treasury management people saying they're bullish on Bitcoin. And so there's some like upside that they want to capture there. But it does raise a question. It's definitely a risk on move for Tether.
Kind of actually goes back to the Bitcoin as a treasury asset narrative that we saw from some of the big companies in the space a couple of years ago, right? MicroStrategy most famously going all in, but even with Tesla and other firms putting a portion of their reserves in Bitcoin as something that was a bit more resilient to some of the more macroeconomic things that were playing out in the market at the time. So it does sort of suggest that maybe that narrative is coming back into style a little bit, but it also suggests that, yeah, the company's putting its money where its mouth is as it relates to, hey, Bitcoin can be a more resilient store of value relative to a banking sector that is kind of in crisis these last few months. So maybe there's something there that they see sort of in the macroeconomic tides that makes now right. But again, that's complete speculation on my part.
It is definitely time for some kind of hedge like that because we are also seeing the U.S. debt ceiling debate go on. So treasury yields are actually dropping very slightly, but there is some anxiety out there about that. So that could be a factor here too in terms of their fiscal management.
All right, Jen, we give you the last word on this one. Tether, Bitcoin.
I got no good words to say on this. When I saw the headline about Tether investing in Bitcoin for their reserves, I thought about this we talk about it almost every day. Bitcoin's having its time in the sunshine again. And so this is just another story to show me that more crypto companies are focusing in on Bitcoin. The technology is being built up. And I think we're going to see, Bitcoin have its time in the spotlight again. And that's where I'm going to leave it.
All right. At Bitcoin in Miami, it's that time of year. Having a little bit of FOMO about that conference, actually. I don't know about you guys, but
you still have time to go.
Looking for some dispatches from Miami, should anyone be down there. So let us know in the comments, maybe.